What if I told you that the most powerful drug lord in the world today is someone you have probably never heard of? While El Chapo was being hunted across Mexico, arrested twice, escaping twice, and eventually rotting in an American supermax prison, his partner was quietly watching from the shadows. Never arrested, never extradited, never caught. For over 40 years, this man ran one of the most powerful criminal organizations in human history, and most people have no idea he exists. This is the story of Ismael Zambada Garcia, known to everyone in the criminal world simply as El Mayo, El Chapo's partner, the invisible half of the Sinaloa cartel, and arguably the most successful drug lord who has ever lived. El Chapo got caught. Pablo Escobar got shot. Every other major drug lord you have ever heard of either died violently or ended up in prison. El Mayo is still free. At the time this story was written, Ismael Zambada Garcia is in his mid-70s. He has been at the very top of the global drug trade since the 1980s. He has survived the collapse of multiple cartels, the deaths of dozens of partners and associates, the most intensive law enforcement operations in Mexican history, and the full weight of the American DEA, CIA, and military intelligence directed at finding him. And he has never spent a single day in prison. How? That is the question. And the answer is one of the most fascinating stories in the history of organized crime. Ismael Zambada Garcia was born on January 1st, 1948, in the small village of El Alamo, in the mountains of Sinaloa, the same rugged, beautiful, desperately poor region of Mexico that produced El Chapo. The Sierra Madre Mountains of Sinaloa have been producing drug traffickers for generations. The poverty, the remoteness, the tradition of growing opium poppies, all of it creates an environment where the drug trade is not an aberration, but a way of life. Zambada grew up in this world. He understood it from childhood. He knew the mountains, the people, the rhythms of a place where the government was distant and the local strongmen were what passed for authority. He was not a child who dreamed of escape. He was a child who paid attention, who watched, who listened, who learned the landscape, physical and social, of the world he had been born into with the quiet intensity of someone who intended to use that knowledge one day. He entered the drug trade young, starting as a small-scale trafficker, moving marijuana and then heroin through the mountain routes that the people of Sinaloa had been using for generations. He was not flashy. He was not violent by the standards of his world. He was careful, methodical, and patient in a way that set him apart from almost everyone around him. He built relationships, slowly, carefully, with the farmers who grew the crops, with the local officials who could be persuaded to look the other way, with the transporters who moved product across the country, with the contacts on the other side of the border who could distribute it in the United States. Each relationship was an investment. Each contact was a piece of a network that Zambada was building with extraordinary deliberateness over years and then decades. He never rushed. He never overreached. He never made moves he was not certain he could sustain. By the time he came to the attention of the major players in Mexican organized crime in the 1980s, Zambada had already built a substantial operation. He was not a newcomer looking for a sponsor. He was an established figure with his own network, his own roots, and his own reputation for reliability and discretion. His partnership with Joaquin Guzman, El Chapo, began in the late 1980s and early 1990s as the Sinaloa cartel was being formed. The two men were complementary in almost every way. El Chapo was bold, charismatic, theatrical. He loved the trappings of power, the recognition, the legend. He gave interviews, he met with celebrities, he built ostentatious houses and drove flashy cars, and cultivated a public persona that made him famous around the world. El Mayo was none of these things. El Mayo stayed in the mountains. He avoided cameras, he refused interviews. He moved constantly between remote communities in the Sierra Madre where he had grown up and where his family had deep roots going back generations. He trusted almost nobody outside a tiny circle of family members and lifelong associates, and he never ever drew attention to himself if he could possibly avoid it. This difference in style was not just personal preference, it was strategic genius of the highest order. El Chapo's fame was ultimately his downfall. The more famous he became, the more resources the Mexican and American governments devoted to catching him. The more he was in the public eye, the more pressure there was to act. His escapes from prison, brilliant and audacious as they were, generated enormous publicity that made it politically impossible for the authorities to stop hunting him. El Mayo watched all of this from the shadows and drew his own conclusions. Stay invisible. Stay in the mountains. Trust nobody. Never stop moving. Never meet anyone you don't absolutely have to meet. And above all, never give your enemies a face to put on a wanted poster that the public will actually care about. It worked for 4 decades. While El Chapo was being hunted, captured, escaping, building tunnels, and eventually being extradited to the United States, El Mayo was running the Sinaloa cartel's actual day-to-day operations with quiet, ruthless efficiency. He was the engine behind the machine, the man who kept everything running while his partner was making headlines. And the cartel under his management became something extraordinary. The Sinaloa cartel that El Mayo built and ran is not simply a gang of violent criminals moving drugs across a border. It is a sophisticated multinational organization with operations in dozens of countries, financial structures that rival legitimate corporations, and a level of logistical complexity that would be impressive in any industry. It controls coca production in parts of Colombia and Peru. It operates methamphetamine laboratories across Mexico. It has distribution networks in the United States, Europe, Asia, and Australia. It corrupts officials at every level of government in multiple countries. It has its own intelligence gathering operation, its own counterintelligence, its own legal representation, its own money laundering infrastructure spread across multiple continents. The revenues generated by this organization are staggering. Estimates vary enormously, but most analysts believe the Sinaloa cartel generates somewhere between $3 and $5 billion per year in drug revenues. Some estimates go much higher. And at the center of this empire for decades has been El Mayo, sitting in the mountains of Sinaloa, moving between safe houses in communities where everyone knows him and nobody will betray him, making decisions, managing relationships, resolving disputes, running the business with the calm efficiency of a CEO who has been doing the same job for so long that it has become second nature. The American DEA has offered enormous rewards for information leading to his capture. At various points, the reward has reached $15 million. $15 million for information about a man who has been at the top of the global drug trade for 40 years. Nobody has collected. This is partly because of the fear El Mayo inspires. Anyone who betrays him in Sinaloa knows what the consequences will be, not just for themselves, but for their family. The culture of the Sierra Madre is one where loyalty is everything and betrayal is the worst thing a person can do. El Mayo has spent decades cultivating a position in that culture that makes him almost untouchable. But it is also because of something more complicated. In the communities of rural Sinaloa, El Mayo is not universally seen as a criminal. He is seen as a local figure, someone whose family has been there for generations, someone who employs people, who funds local projects, who maintains a kind of order in a region where the official government has never been particularly effective at doing so. This is the same dynamic that protected El Chapo for years, and Pablo Escobar before him. In places where the state has failed, where poverty is endemic and legitimate opportunity is scarce, the drug lord who provides employment and community investment can become genuinely popular. It does not matter to a farmer in the Sierra Madre that El Mayo's organization has been responsible for thousands of deaths in Mexico's drug wars. What matters is that he is known, he is local, and he has never personally done them harm. The drug wars themselves are worth understanding because the Sinaloa cartel under El Mayo has not maintained its dominant position through diplomacy alone. The conflicts between the Sinaloa cartel and its rivals, particularly the brutal Zetas cartel and later the rapidly expanding Jalisco New Generation cartel, have been extraordinarily violent. Tens of thousands of people have died in Mexico's ongoing drug war. Entire communities have been terrorized. Journalists have been killed for reporting on cartel activity. Politicians have been assassinated for refusing to cooperate or for cooperating with the wrong side. The Mexican military has been deployed to region after region in operations that have achieved limited success at enormous human cost. El Mayo has been at the center of this conflict. His organization has been responsible for violence on a massive scale. He is not a gentle figure living peacefully in the mountains. He is a man who has survived and prevailed in one of the most violent environments on Earth by being absolutely willing to use overwhelming force when he calculated it was necessary. But he has also shown, consistently, a willingness to negotiate, to compromise, and to avoid conflict when conflict was not in his interest. This pragmatism, this ability to fight when he had to and deal when he could, has been another key to his extraordinary longevity. There were moments when he came close to being caught. Intelligence operations penetrated parts of his network. Associates were arrested and occasionally cooperated with authorities. The net tightened on several occasions, and every time El Mayo moved, changed his location, changed his routines, cut off anyone who might be compromised, disappeared deeper into the mountains that had protected him his entire life. The mountains of Sinaloa are not just a geographic location for El Mayo. They are his home, his protection, his identity. He knows every valley, every village, every family. He has relationships built over a lifetime in every community. In the Sierra Madre, he is not a fugitive. He is a native son. That distinction made him almost impossible to catch through conventional law enforcement methods. The biggest shock in his story came in July 2024, in circumstances that are still not fully understood and that remain deeply controversial. El Mayo appeared in the United States. He was allegedly brought there against his will. The story that emerged, pieced together from court documents, government statements, and investigative journalism, was extraordinary. Zambada had been lured to a meeting in Mexico under false pretenses. He believed he was attending a business meeting. Instead, he was put on a plane and flown to El Paso, Texas, where American law enforcement was waiting. The man who arranged this, who allegedly deceived the most powerful drug lord in the world into walking into an American trap, was Joaquin Guzman Lopez, the son of El Chapo. El Chapo's own son had betrayed El Mayo. The implications were seismic. The Sinaloa cartel, already under enormous pressure from rival organizations, immediately began fracturing. A violent conflict broke out between factions loyal to El Mayo's family and factions aligned with Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons who had been consolidating their own power within the organization. The war within the Sinaloa cartel that followed has been devastating for the communities caught in the middle. In cities like Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa, street battles between factions have killed civilians and paralyzed normal life. The organization that El Mayo had kept running with such disciplined efficiency for decades was tearing itself apart. As of the time this story was written, Ismael Zambada Garcia is in American custody awaiting trial. He faces charges related to drug trafficking and murder. His lawyers contest the circumstances of his arrival in the United States, arguing that he was kidnapped rather than arrested. After 40 years at the very top of the global drug trade, the invisible man has finally been seen. El Chapo became famous and was destroyed by his fame. El Mayo stayed invisible and survived everything. He outlasted rivals, partners, enemies, and the combined efforts of two governments. He built an empire that changed the global drug trade. He watched from the shadows as everyone around him fell. Until the very end, the mountains kept his secret. And then El Chapo's son opened the door. Ismael Zambada Garcia, El Mayo, the invisible half of the Sinaloa cartel, the most successful drug lord in the history of organized crime, the man who watched everyone around him fall, and kept standing until he didn't.